Hi modelers. In this video I go over the lighting I did for the C deck under the poop deck and some miscellaneous poop deck work covering steps 19 and 20 of the Trumpeter instruction booklet. And a Pontos instruction booklet omission is discovered. This is part 16 of my Trumpeter 1 to 200 scale Titanic build series. To begin this video, I basically installed the capstans, the bollards, the vents, and the skylights to the poop deck covered in the Trumpeter instruction booklet steps 19 and 20. I also painted the poop deck and aft well deck winches shamrock green. Now if you have the Pontos kit, you will note that on page 21 of the instructions there are small photo etch screens that go over some of the boat deck vents. Now this is the only page that shows screens being applied to the vent openings. Yet when one turns to page 15 showing the poop deck, you will notice that the vents G22, which are facing forward, show screens installed over the vent openings. The Pontos photo etch sheet C shows plenty of vent screens, but the Pontos instruction booklet does not show which screens are used for the poop deck vents, so I had to test fit the screens to see which ones go over which vents used for the poop deck. So to save people time, if you do have the Pontos kit, the picture shows my notes indicating which screens go over which vents. Now, applying the screens to the vent openings was not too difficult. The first thing I did was I just would tape the vents to the table, and then the next step would be that I took some tweezers that happened to be magnetized, and they just picked up the screens and it was easy to put them in place. I didn't really have to grab a hold of the screen. They just magnetized right to the tweezers. And then I just set them in place, and I used CA glue, put around the rim of the vent opening, and then laid the screen right on top, and the screen mounted right onto the vent pretty easily. So it wasn't too difficult of a step to do. Now I mentioned that the G22 vents are sitting forward in the Pontos picture. Now this is not an error on Pontos' part, since this is what the Trumpeter kit booklet shows and how the G22 vent is installed on the model. Now, is this an error on Trumpeter's part? After all, typically the vents on these old ships, I thought, faced aft, and I thought I had discovered another Trumpeter error. But recently I have seen old photos of the Olympic that has some of the poop deck vents sitting at different angles. And I think in this picture, the one on the right is actually a picture of the Titanic poop deck. So could it be that some of these vents could be turned at will? It appears so from looking at various photos of the Olympic. So with this in mind, it looks like that this is really not a Trumpeter kit error. And with these G22 vents facing forward, it seems to be the way things could have been on the Titanic. Now, since the docking bridge vents are thin metal and hollow, I would think that this is not going to make a good connection to glue the docking bridge to these vents. So I decided to use 40 thousandths inch thick black plastic to fill in the top of these vents. With the plastic super glued and flush to the top of the vents, I now had a larger surface area by which I could glue the docking bridge to. And I just used model glue for this connection. Now moving to the front of the poop deck section at the third class entrance area, which is technically C deck, I installed extra support posts. Now I just drilled 1mm pilot holes under the poop deck and used 40 thousandth inch plastic rods cut to the necessary length to make the support posts. The placement of these posts is supported by the article entitled Documentation of a new Titanic Olympic find. Support sanctions under the poop deck. And this article is found on the website titanic-cad-plans.com. So this is an option you can add. So I just decided to add it. It's not a very hard detail to add. And next it was time to figure out how I was going to light the sea deck under the poop deck and the poop deck skylights. I figured that to reduce the lighting hotspots for the portholes, the best option was to go with fiber optics. The fiber optics I used were 0.06 of an inch in diameter, or 1.5 millimeters in diameter. And I used soft white LED strips as the light source. I also sanded the fiber optic ends on both ends smooth, and I just started off with 320 grit, then I moved to 600 grit, then I used 1000 grit, then I used 1500 grit, and then I used 2000 grit to get a nice smooth surface at each end of the fiber optics. So the first thing I did to get started was to paint the inside of the hull that's under the poop deck white to provide some light reflection. Then I glued an extra piece of plastic that I had cut out from B deck on the C deck under the poop deck to provide a place to mount an LED strip right under the poop deck skylights. Now the picture also shows two pre-wired connectors that I wired up to power when I was wiring up the hull in anticipation of needing some power source for the poop deck area. And I also did the same thing to the bow area. Now, once in place and wired up, the LED strips plugged into one of those pre-wired power source connectors, and they lit up just fine and provided plenty of light. In fact, the light's so good that right under the skylight that I did have to do some extra light blocking of the skylights from underneath it with flat black paint because there was actually some bleeding through of the light when I just painted it white. So the thick gray plastic was not dense enough to totally block out all the light for the skylights. So something to think about if you decide to do this approach that I'm doing. Next, I made various lengths of fiber optics and mounted them at the right angle to the LED strips to produce light that would not be too bright at the portholes, but also at the same time be balanced between the portholes along the whole sea deck. Now I used crystal clear glue to secure the fiber optics in the portholes, and after drying, the fiber optics were secured in place and ready for testing. The other area that I added fiber optics to was at the front of the poop deck section where the portholes are located at the third class entrance area, which actually is on C deck from the well deck. Now I was originally going to just use crystal clear glue as the windows and then let the LED strips just illuminate those portholes, but I didn't like the way they looked, and so then I decided to use fiber optics for these portholes, and they illuminated much better than just using the crystal clear glue and then letting the LED strips try to shine through that. So the fiber optics just gave a better look for that area. Alright, so once everything was in place for testing, I did discover I had some light leaks to contend with. So I just used some strips of black plastic placed in the necessary areas to stop the light leaks. And the end result, as you can see here, is a mildly lit portholes with no light leaks. And things turned out pretty good. The portholes really aren't overly bright. Nice and evenly lit. And the poop deck itself is not real bright either. Of course, when I add the docking bridge lights and the deck lights for the base of the cranes, that'll add some more light to the poop deck. But overall it seems to be a good brightness, not too bright, not too dull, kind of just right. Alright, so that should do it about do it for this video. So in the next video I'm going to go over some of the final touches to the poop deck area and the well deck area, the aft well deck, and I'm also going to show how I wired up the poop deck lights. So until next video, have a great day.